Hey there, maniacs and viewers. You're watching the Main Man channel. It's not just a name, it's a way of life. You got to improvise, adapt, and overcome each and every day just to make this cruel old world. Appreciate y'all watching. Please make sure you like, share, and subscribe. And comment as well. Comments seem to be more important than anything these days. So even if you don't like the video, even if you hate me, just comment something. Type GGG or just anything, gibberish, whatever. But anyway, that being said, this right here is the third part in our Buford Pusser, the Blood and Thunder Years series. We're going to be covering Section 3, or what I would call Chapter 3 of Bill Waggoner's book, Buford Pusser, the Blood and Thunder Years. Now, I'm covering the period that he covers in Chapter 3, but he didn't add a lot of the things that actually happened. So I've added some context to it, and I've kind of straightened it out and fact-checked it to what I know to be true, or as close to the truth as we can get it. So that being said, let's continue. All right. In early 1961, Buford got tired of the big city. He got tired of Chicago. He was homesick. He missed his family back home. He missed his life back in McNairy County. Missed his dad and his mom, his friends, things of that nature. And he thought maybe he could find work down there. I think Pauline, who was not exactly from the South, but I guess you could say she was from the South too, because she was from around the Hazy, Virginia area. I guess she longed for that rural environment as well, and she was homesick as well. And Memphis, the Memphis area, which is where McNairy County is, West Tennessee, is a little bit more closer to her people in Hazy, Virginia than Chicago is. So also, she still got her ex up there in Chicago, and I'm sure she wanted to get away from him and be in Pete Vance. But anyway, so they decided to load up the kids and head for McNairy County. Now, this is a picture of Buford and the children when they were a little bit older. From left to right, there's Mike Vance, Diane Vance, his two stepchildren, of course Buford, and then there's little Dwana, the farthest on the right. They're a little bit older in this picture. This is probably after Pauline has passed, in my opinion. So this is a picture when they were a little bit older, and a Nashville newspaper took this during the interview. But anyway, so Buford, we know, worked at the Union Bag Company in Chicago, and he was also a bouncer, and he was also a part-time wrestler, and he couldn't make it at wrestling. I think he liked wrestling. I just don't think he had the time or the patience, especially having to support 3 children and a wife, because you didn't make a lot of money unless you were at the top of the cards back then in the territory days of wrestling. And I don't think he was a big favorite in Chicago. I don't know. But with the wrestlers and stuff up there, he was having trouble climbing the ladder and getting to be out of the mid-card status. And you've got to be in the main event status to make any money back there in the territory days. So he couldn't make enough to support him and the family. And he was working 3 jobs, folks. So he figured he might have a little bit better shot wrestling in the West Tennessee and Memphis and Nashville area, that little territory there, which was known as the Memphis wrestling circuit. The Memphis wrestling circuit back then, the Memphis territory as it was known, was a pretty good and thriving territory at that time. They had a lot of good stars, and they had a lot of guys that were making money. And him figuring him from the local area, he could make some money. And that's a good assumption. And I think he probably would have made some money with them. But the problem was, one of the big problems was, it's still, even moving back down here and wrestling in the Memphis circuit, you might make $50 a week wrestling or less, whatever it was, how much ever he was making. He was making mid-card status, whatever they made, it just wasn't enough to support a family on. And so that's why I think Buford ran for a constable of that district and to get his foot in the door in law enforcement. So he would have some money, but still, even that was a part-time gig. That wasn't really a full-time gig. So he was having trouble making ends meet, and eventually he quits wrestling. But he tries it for a while. What happened was, he had a couple of matches with a favorite wrestler at the time, a main eventer, and this main eventer didn't like Buford. And this main eventer got rough with Buford. Buford got rough back with him. They got into an all-out knockdown shoot brawl. Well, they did it once. I think it was one night in Memphis. Then the next night they wrestled in Nashville. Same thing happened. And by the end of it, Buford's eyes were both swelled up. He looked like Rocky Balboa. And the left side of his face felt like mush. He took a lot of hits to the left side of his face. I mean, of course, when you're in wrestling, if a right-handed wrestler's hitting you, they're going to use their right hand. A right-handed brawler is going to use his right hand and try to hit you on the left side of your face. So after that, he pretty much quit wrestling. But while he was wrestling in the Memphis territory, there was a young man who became a fan favorite of Buford. And this would actually help him later on in life. That young man's name was Jerry the King Lawler. He liked to watch Buford wrestling when he was a kid. And he was a fan favorite of Buford. Eventually, Jerry the King Lawler got into radio, and he got into wrestling, and he became the king of Memphis wrestling. But unfortunately, Buford had to get out of the business because he couldn't make any money. It would have been nice to have maybe seen Buford stay if he could have. I think if Buford could have stayed in wrestling and made it, he'd have been a lot better off, and him and his family would have been a lot better off if he could have made it big. But unfortunately, that wasn't in the stars for him. It kept him out of a lot of trouble, I think. But anyway, Jerry King Lawler was a fan of his, and that helps him out later in life because Jerry King Lawler's got some Memphis radio and newspaper and comic book connections, and that helps him out later on in life. Now, here we got a picture of the Dark Lord of the Sith and his apprentice. Got a picture of Carl Pusser and Buford Pusser. This is Buford a little bit later on in life when he changed his hairstyle. Anyway, but before that, he always had like a flat top or whatever for years. Most of his life. So Carl knew that he could probably get him on as police chief in Adamsville, Tennessee, their hometown. The reason for that is Carl was police chief for a while, and I think he had to step out, and it was like 57, 58, or 59, because he couldn't walk the beats no more, so he had to quit doing it because he hurt his hip real bad in a car wreck. And that's why you see him walking that cane there. He's got a cane there. Now, That being said, though, Buford didn't come home till 1961, I believe it was. And it was the end of 61 before he got to be police chief of Adamsville. Now, there were several police chiefs that they may have come home in 59, but he didn't get to be police chief till 61. Okay, Buford may have loaded the kids up, and they may have come down here in 1959, but I think they did, actually. But he didn't get to be police chief till 1961. There was 3 police chiefs, and they changed the name from police chief to marshal, town marshal, but it was the same thing a couple of times. But there was actually another guy by the name of Buford who was police chief for a term or two in between this. His name was Buford Surratt. And so since Buford Surratt was in that name, these big newspaper men like W.R. Morris, Bill Wagner, and all these other people decided to make it look like Buford was police chief of Adamsville from 59, or the time that Carl got hurt, all the way up until 64 when he got elected sheriff, and that's just not the case. It was the end of 61 before Buford ever became police chief. Now, here's a picture of Leonard Ray Blanton, who was a who ends up being governor of Tennessee, and he's one of the most crooked governors and politicians you'll ever meet, and he was a real good friend of Buford's. Well, he was born in the Adamsville, Tennessee area, and happened to be, I couldn't find a picture of his dad, which was Leonard A. Blanton, but Leonard Ray's dad was the mayor of Adamsville at the time, and Carl was friends with him, and he convinced him and the city alderman that Buford would be a good police chief, so they hired Buford to be police chief, and that really kicked off his law enforcement career. He was already constable, but he got to be police chief. And when he got to be police chief, of course, James Dickey, McNairy County Sheriff James Dickey here, actually took Buford under his wing, I guess hoping that Buford would stay police chief, or hoping that Buford would become a deputy for him sometime. But he showed Buford the ropes, the good and the bad, of being a law enforcement officer in McNairy County. So Buford actually got to learn how to be sheriff from the sheriff. And then he got a lot of law enforcement experience, of course, from his and tutelage from the guy behind the scenes, which was Carl, his dad, which was kind of the brains of all this, getting Buford into law enforcement so Buford could find ways to make money and stuff and support the family, both legal and illegal. But anyway, that's a whole topic for another video. But anyway, come 1964, Buford ran as a Republican against James Dickey, and then there was another one running, George Weatherford, who was a independent. Now, Dickey here was a Democrat, and he was the favorite, and but unfortunately, he died in a car accident. So Buford ended up winning the 1964 election and became sheriff. So I'm going to have to do a whole video about the relationship between Buford and James Dickey and how James Dickey died, because it's a little bit shady. He died in a car wreck. Something happened with the right tire on the vehicle, or right wheel, and he died in a car wreck. But I'm going to have to do a whole video about that, because there's a lot of interesting information and stuff with that. And I've actually did that video and I've got it ready, but this one needed to drop first, so that one would make sense. So I'm going to have a couple of filler videos in here about a lot of stuff that we need to talk about. before we come back to reviewing section 4 or 5. I mean, how many ever sections we can get more video of the Blood and Thunder years. But like I say, this has been, I've added context, I've fact checked it and everything, and I covered the period of time that section 3 of Buford Pusser, to chapter 3, section 3, whatever you want to call it, that Buford Pusser and Blood and Thunder years covered. And we'll stop right there. I love y'all. Y'all the best people in the world. God bless you. Please check out all my videos. I've got other content besides this, folks. And like, share, and subscribe, and send me some kind of comment, even if it says you suck. Because comments seem to be the most important thing in the algorithm these days, about moving along and taking and shooting the channel into the algorithm. But anyway, like I say, I'll catch y'all next time, and more videos to come, especially on Buford Pusser, and some range videos too.